Can you see the screen?
Yeah, I can.
So what we are going to do is, since you have made that FS, I will just give you a little more concepts in terms of how we are going to make these kind of documentation. So this will be a multi-part lecture. I think that is one of the most important aspects you need to pick up. So today what we are going to do is we'll try and understand what happens from when the customer gives you requirements and you start documenting it in a way which is expected to be done. Okay, so there are multiple ways of doing it. Today we'll start with one of the most common way of doing things. Okay, and then we'll also do based on what we have done in terms of use cases, how to use the use cases and UML diagrams or the concepts to create function specs. So okay, so let's start with just looking at how the software development itself happens. So we have seen this screen earlier, but just to recap, so this is the process of developing a software, okay, where there are different phases in the life cycle of a project. So it starts with the customer saying, we want to have a software developed. So there will be something called requirements development, which will come to see design, then the actual programming part of it, then testing, and once the testing from the software team is conducted, it is given to the customer for testing, which is known as UAT, user acceptance testing. Okay. And once the system is accepted by the customer and becomes live, then the support and maintenance, which keeps on happening over the period of time. So it's a long process in terms of support and maintenance. For any project, support and maintenance will always be the longer part. The development part will be much smaller. So this is the development part, first time development of a project. Once it is done, then it gets into support and maintenance, where changes can happen. So either it could be a bug or a defect which is being fixed, or there could be new modules, new features which customer can keep asking to be added into the system. So one of the primary things which we are going to do today is to understand requirements. Okay, how the requirements is understood by the customer, how the requirements should be understood by the developer, or what are the aspects which a business analyst has to keep in mind so that what the customer understands is converted into requirements which the developer understands or the technical team understands. There is always a serious gap between what customer describes about a particular software to be developed versus how the tech team understands the requirements written in a piece of paper. Okay, and that is where most of the trouble has been happening in the IT industry, and that is the reason why business analysts have suddenly become a very, very desired profile. So what is requirement? Requirement is nothing but expectation from a software system to be developed or to be acquired. So there could be a software system which will be developed from grounds up. There is nothing existing. Everything has to be developed right from the beginning. So that is one way of getting a software in place for meeting a business object. So let's try and understand, why does a company want a software to be acquired? Because there could be multiple reasons. There could be a requirement to automate a particular process because it's taking too much of time. There are too many errors happening in the process, so they want to automate it. There could be reasons. There is a multi-location team which wants to work in the similar system. So the company wants to keep the data at a central location. Right now, doing it manually means manual transfer of data from one place to another. That takes a lot of time of some people in the company, which company says it's not necessary. We can automate it and we get better benefits. So always company will think in terms of, if I am investing in developing a software, is it going to give me benefits? So from their end, they will do something called cost benefit, which is a very common thing. Even in your case, if as a human being, we do some investments of funds, we always look at whether it's going to give me a better return. The common phenomena across the world, whenever you are spending money, you want to see, are you getting the value first out of that money? So here also, there will be a cost benefit analysis which will be done by the customer side. Slowly, as a business analyst, when you start getting into a senior position as a business analyst, you will have to start doing cost benefit analysis as well. Okay, so considering that the customer has done the cost benefit analysis and has realized that benefits are more for this system, then they will decide whether they want to go for a newly developed system, or they want to buy a product which they can use directly. So there are different ways of getting a software. No matter what, ultimately the customer has to say what do they want. Okay, what should the system do? That is termed as requirements. Okay, so the customer says, this is what I want from the system. That is known as C requirement. This is not a standard terminology. I'm just giving you this for a better kind of correlation between what these requirements are. So the customer says, I want this. That we can term as C requirements. C stands for customer. These requirements may not be properly understood or kind of clear to the technical team which is going to make the software on these requirements. Why? Because for customer, they are doing certain things day in and day out. It's their business, it's their job. So they understand a lot of things quite well. For a tech team, what they do, they write code. So if somebody talks to them in the language of coding, they understand it very well because that's what they do day in and day out. So there is always a gap between the way these two entities look at things. So that's why there is a translator which is required in between, which is a business analyst, to convert C requirements into something called D requirements, which is a developer requirements. So these are two different perspectives, okay, at how we look at things. But essentially they are the same, right? So the customer wants to develop a system, the developer has to develop that system which the customer wants. So they cannot be different. They have to think in the same manner. The problem is the perspective. And that's why business analysts come into picture. Now let's look at an example. So what is a C requirement? So C requirement says that, let's say I run a company and I want to get a software developed. So I will say, I want my customers to be able to make online payments if they want to buy some product. This is what my requirement is, because I don't want people to come to my offices. I don't have that much of money to open offices everywhere in India. But I want these products to be available to everyone, right? In that case, the only option is online, right? People can go see the products and then buy. This is the way customer will describe them. Now, for a developer or tech guy, to convert this into software is not a simple task, because it requires, this one line will require at least 6 months of effort to do this. So this has to be now broken down. So broken down will happen later. Let's first see how will the developer understand. The developer will understand in the manner saying that means you need to integrate it with the payment gateway. So in a single line, if we have to convert this C requirement into a D requirement, this means it's an integration with a payment gateway. This is an objective statement for a developer or a tech team. And this translation has to happen by a BA. And that is why BAs are paid that much for this. So talking in the language in which the respective parties understand is key. So when we are looking at, when you are talking to a customer, or when you are looking at requirements as something which is the prerequisite for an actual software development, you have to start thinking in these terms. Now, where does the C requirement come? Where does the D requirement come? So the C requirements obviously will come from, the first step will be the documents which will come from the sales team, or if there are some tenders which have been released by the customer. So if, let's say, Bank of America wants to develop a software, they will not directly give it to a vendor. They may give, but typically what happens, there is a request for proposal, RFP, request for proposal. So they issue a document, sometimes also it's in the form of tender document. So tender happens in government sectors primarily. So there is always a tender to which people apply, the companies apply, saying that, okay, I want to do this project and this is what I will charge. Okay. Similarly, in software also the same thing happens. Companies issue an RFP or a tender. Different companies respond to it, saying, okay, we want to do it, and so and so. Then further discussions happen, negotiations happen, and then based on the criteria which the company has set up, one vendor is selected and said, okay, you go ahead and do it. Okay. Then further discussions will happen. Till that time, all the documentations, whatever customer has stated, because RFP document contains a lot of requirements. So the customer will, the sales team, your sales team, which is interacting with the customer for getting this project, will have RFPs, various minutes of meeting documentation, everything they will have, which you will get from them if you have got the project and you are starting to go further in the project. So that's the first source of requirements from coming.
So first thing from the sales team.
Sorry?
So the first thing comes from the sales team.
Yes, it has to. Unless,
So then,
unless
but they, when they are okay, when they are providing the requirement, then why would you deal with the customer directly when they are in the picture, in between?
because this is a very high level, this is a C requirement, and also even it's a pre-C. You can say it is a pre-C. It's not complete requirement. Okay, it's called pre-C, or you can call it, it is set of requirements, but it is not complete. Okay, there will be a lot of many others which will come to know later. If that is the case, then you don't need BS, right?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
No, that's not correct. Wait. So once the first set of requirements or the references come from these set of documents, then the requirement elicitation starts. So requirement elicitation, as we have discussed, is a process of discovering detailed requirements. Okay. In that we decide, or you decide as a BA, what is the way in which you are going to interact with the customer to get the detailed requirement, which will include interviews, meetings, demonstrations, prototyping, so many stuff. So requirement elicitation is one of the most critical part of any software development effort. So this takes sometimes months. This takes, depending on the size of the project, it's a long process. And this is the portion where you have to play the most important role. Okay. So based on whatever understanding you have from these documents, you will decide the strategy as to how you are going to get the detailed requirements from the customer. That's part of the requirement elicitation. So these two sets of processes or sets of activities gives you the complete customer version of the requirement. And then you get into something called requirement analysis and requirement specification. That's where we have understood how to divide problems into smaller parts, how to create use cases, sequence diagrams, and so on and so forth. That part is called requirement analysis. There you will decipher and break the requirements into smaller parts and convert it into a language which the tech team understands. That's the process of requirement analysis. And then you document it into something called requirement specification. There is one more process which will come in between. It's called requirements validation. Okay, but that we'll see a little later. So that's how the requirements go through. So from C to D is a long process. So typically, to give you an idea, if a project of 6 months duration, okay, typically the requirements will be anywhere from 1 to 5 calendar months. I'm talking about 6 calendar months project. The requirements process C to D. I mean, I'm eliminating this part, the sales team, whatever they have taken. From requirement elicitation to speccing might take 1.5 months, calendar months. So which is approximately 20% of your effort. Okay. So that's what happens in any of the projects. Okay. Having said that, we are talking currently about new projects. But in projects where, let's say, like you were working possibly, that was not a new project. At some point in time, every project is a new project. But once it starts, then what happens? The customer will simply send you a document because there's no sales team now. There is a project manager of software company and the project manager possibly on the other side. They directly send you a requirement document, which you can say business requirement document, which again leads to the start of the process called requirement elicitation. So you might not have an elaborate process, but the percentage of effort required in this will still remain the same. It will never change. And because people try to shortcut this, all projects, those projects have a definite chances of failure. So just to give you now, since we are into requirements, 2 data points. One, worldwide, more than half of the projects are either delayed or they are loss making. Second set of data, more than 30% of the projects, they completely fail. The success percentage ratio of software projects, where you can say that, okay, these projects have successfully been completed, is approximately less than 20%. That is one. Second set of data, why do these projects fail? So there is a company called Standish Group. They do survey every year on why do large projects fail, and they publish 1 to 10 reasons. And every year, number 1 or number 2 reason is requirements. So you can search on Google for Standish Group, and you can see their reports. 2003, 2004, 2015. Every year, requirements comes at the top of the reasons for the failure of the project. So it seems a very innocuous thing, requirements. What is in it? There's nothing. But unfortunately, this particular simple term called requirements has been causing a lot of failures in software industry. So taking it further now, what kind of requirements we are talking about? So this is a little more into classification and understanding it further. So requirements are of two types. One is called functional requirement, other one is called a non-functional. Now, functional and non-functional pertains to the features which are available to users. Okay, both of them are features. Okay, but one of them, which is functional requirements, is more in terms of how do you use the system. Okay, in terms of whether you can create a user, whether you can log in into the system, whether you can do a fixed deposit, whether you can do a balance inquiry. These are functions related to the software, or these are the functions or the facilities offered by the system. Non-functional requirements are also the features of the system, but they are not something which is used from the user's perspective. Okay, it is more from a property or the attribute perspective. So somebody says that, okay, this website looks so nice. That is something which was obviously stated by the customer as a non-functional, or this website is so fast. Okay, so these are termed as non-functional. Okay,
Hello?
yeah, any questions?
Functional requirements also, like, it's also a website. I mean, it can also be a website, right? What do you mean by, what is the basic difference you said between these two?
That's what I stated. No, website is a software, right?
Right.
So it will have both. Any software will have both. So all
Yeah.
requirements pertaining to anything will always have both. Okay. So functional requirement, what do you do in a website? So if you are dealing with, let's say, yahoo.com, what do you do?
You just try to log in, look into your emails, and go attach whatever you have to attach, or compose an email,
Yeah,
or save something, all these things.
correct. So this is what is functional requirement. This is what can be termed as functionality of the system. Okay. So the way you interact with the system.
Yeah, user friendly, right?
No, not necessarily user friendly. This is not, see, when you compose mail, it has nothing to do with user friendliness, right? It is about being able to write an email, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The user friendliness comes if you are finding difficult to compose an email. That those terms will come when you're not able to do the basic stuff which you expected out of a system. Okay? So you can log in into a system. That's a function. That's a feature of a system. If you are able to send an email, that's a function. If you are able
Right.
to open an email and see, these are functions. Right? What is a non-functional thing? It loads fast. Right? Even if
Yeah.
1 million people are using the same website, it is still running fast. It's not breaking down. That's a non-functional, which is related to, so non-functional requirements are related to usability, look and feel, security, performance. These are the non-functional. Okay, and why these are classified and important is because different sets of people might be working on these requirements. Quite possible in a company. Okay, so that's why they are classified. Otherwise, these are all which is expected by the customer. So as a software company, you have to do all of that, right? But the classification, why do you classify? What is the purpose? That is because it might be allocated to different teams. So security related part, okay, might be done by somebody else. And the basic coding part to provide basic features will be done by, let's say, software development. So that's why they are classified as well. So let's say look and feel part. That will be done by possibly a design team, which might be different from the software development. These are different levels of expertise. So to make it possible for different teams to work on the similar project so that it can be executed in parallel, or the best people do the same thing. It is divided and it's classified. Got it?
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the basic objective as to why we do it. However, the other important part which is related to it is there are certain requirements which are explicitly defined by the customer. So they will tell you that this is what is going to happen. So like the system will deliver cash to the customer, the cash will be delivered after the card was taken out. So these are explicit requirements. Similarly, there will be explicit non-functional requirements. Sorry, this should have been non-functional. So the authorization process will take no more than 1 second. So that's something which is related to performance. So that's a non-functional. The user interface will be easy to use. So these kind of requirements are explicitly mentioned by the customer. But the most difficult part is something called implicit requirements or hidden requirements. And that is one of the reasons why requirements have become one of the top reasons for projects failure, because this thing is not looked at all. In most of the cases, people ignore this. They just go for the obvious. But many a times you ignore the hidden ones. Why? Because either you don't have the skills or you don't have the understanding that there is something called hidden requirements, or something implies to if I say X and something else implies if I say Y. Okay, so now let's say, for example, if you go for shopping, okay, now if you say that, okay, I went for shopping today and I bought 6 sets of dresses. Okay, now there are a lot of things which are hidden in this and which needs to be asked. If I really want to understand what was your shopping experience or what was your shopping all about. Question number 1, which mall did you go or where did you go for shopping? How did you go there? When did you go there? How much money did you spend? When you say 6 sets of dresses, what does it mean? Are you getting me?
Yes.
So for you, it's a simple explanation to what you did. But to really understand for a non-involved person who is not with you, it can be huge amounts of information in a single sentence. That is where the problems actually are happening every day. Okay, so let's say, for example, somebody says the database maintenance processes will occur every night. Okay, now database maintenance is a very, very common term. Okay, and a lot of people understand what is database maintenance. People especially who are into this field. So customer says database maintenance processes will occur every night, but this can lead to either 6 days of effort or 6 weeks of effort, because it's an extremely wide term. So my narrow interpretation could be, I simply want to back up the data. That is called database maintenance, right? But it can mean disaster recovery of the database as well. It means that not only you are taking your database backup in some other machine at one location, but you are also keeping it at a far off location to make sure that if a disaster happens at this place, my data is safe. It can also mean this. And disaster recovery maintenance is expensive process, plus it takes a lot of time to make sure that it happens on a regular basis, because it's going to happen every night. Okay, So now what does it mean? If that is the case, and implicit requirements could be a game changer, then how do you as a business analyst handle this? What will you do to get these implicit? So number one thing is you need to go through these statements first and see if it can be interpreted in multiple ways. So that is the first task every business analyst has to look at. Every statement has to be read carefully and to be just if this can be interpreted in more than one way. That is part one. Part two, ask questions starting with why. You want to understand certain things as to why something is being said by the customer. Why is the most important question a business analyst should use. So why do you need every night the database maintenance, for example? Why do you need database maintenance every night? Are you generating that much of data? Do we expect that much of data to be generated every day? If yes, then is your system which is going to be developed capable of handling that much of data on a daily basis? So it lead to another question, which will then might lead to some more questions. But if you don't do that, it will create a lot of problems once your system is ready, and that is the reasons that these are the reasons for failure. Right? For example, if you look at Flipkart or Google, millions of people are hitting those servers every second. If you don't take into account the performance and the scalability, the system will crash immediately. Like what happened sometime back with Flipkart. They did not anticipate the amount of interest people had in that sale. The servers crashed. Somebody made the same mistake, which you can make in future if you don't ask questions. Either somebody judged it wrongly as to how many visitors, or even if somebody looked at it, they didn't realize the scale of the demand. Then the final stuff which comes into requirements is constraints. Okay. Sometimes users have specific requirements which become ultimately the constraints. For example, because all my systems are in Java, I want this system also to be in Java. Okay. Or my database has always been Oracle, so I don't want any other database to be used. No SQL Server, nothing. I want everything to be done in Oracle. So these things create a lot of constraints in the system, and those things have to be kept in mind. So if somebody says, I want all the reports to be developed in a particular tool, then you need to look for those expertise. Otherwise, you will not be able to develop those tools. Okay. So all of these things have to be determined, discussed, and deciphered at the time when you are talking with the customer. So you are in doing the requirements elicitation. Any questions?
No.
Yeah. So now so we look at a few more concepts. Okay. So now, what are functional requirements? Okay, as we have discussed, so you got an idea. It is more about system features, and this always will be in the form of action phrases. Something which is an action, like logging into the system, sending emails, opening emails, viewing emails, tagging emails, and all this stuff. These are all an indication that this is a functional requirement. Non-functional requirements are more in terms of attributes or properties of the system. So, which could be related to performance, interface, usability, reliability, and support. Okay, so the system will be 99% available. Okay, that's something which is related to reliability. And another aspect of non-functional requirement is it may not always necessarily lead to coding. It might lead to some other arrangements as well. Like reliability is more about system uptime, okay, or system never goes down. So for that, you might require certain provisions in the way database, sorry, the way data center is set up. Okay, so you have multiple servers as backup servers, so that if one goes down, the second one is automatically up and running. So that may not necessarily be related to coding itself. Okay, so that's another reason why certain requirements are termed as non-functional. Okay. So now let's look at some examples and try to figure out what kind of requirements are. So let's say there is a requirement saying system must support 10 parallel tournaments. So there is a game site and various people are playing games on this software, are going to play on this software. And the requirement says the system must support 10 parallel tournaments. What kind of a requirement it is? It's a functional or non-functional?
It's a non-functional.
Why?
The tournaments, I think it's kind of very obvious that
I just want you to reason it out as to why. Why do you think it's a non-functional?
but again, it can be also functional because it also can be an action phrase.
Sorry?
It can also be a functional one because
convert into
because
an action.
It could be also action, right? Tournaments like parallel. I mean, any tournaments. I mean, it's not specific like what tournaments you're talking about though.
No, that's okay. But action means you as a user, how will you do it, convert into an action term? What will you do in the system?
You have to develop the system.
No. User meaning you are a user of this system. Once the system is developed, don't think in terms of BA here. I am saying why it is not a functional requirement. So if you have to state it as an action, what will you do? You will support 10. So as a user of the system, how if I say I support 10 parallel tournaments, is that correct statement?
No.
No, right? What else can you say to make it an action statement? You can't do anything actually here.
No, you can't do anything. It's
so it's a non-functional, right? So it's a property of the system, or it's a feature of the system, which is not an action item or not a something which a user is going to do in this system. Okay, so as a whole, this is a property or an activity. Next, the OTP. So OTP is the one-time password, right? Nowadays, a lot of
I know.
So the OTP must be allowed to be entered within 5 seconds.
It's a function one. Hello?
Yes. Why?
Sorry?
Why?
Because you're doing something, you're interacting, you're trying to create the OTP, and once you get the OTP,
it doesn't say that you are trying to create OTP.
If I'm allowed to enter, If
So
you get a OTP, one-time password, you should enter it in within 5 seconds for that to function, right?
no, it is not saying that. Read it. Read it carefully. It does not say that. It's not. See, first of all, you look at it from a perspective saying that this is applicable to whom? Is it applicable to the user or is it applicable to the system?
System.
Right? So the first problem is it is not applicable to user.
Right.
So it cannot be a functional requirement.
Okay.
As simple as that, right? Because it
Mm-hmm.
says the system should not allow anything, any OTP which is more than 5 seconds old. So this is a system feature or a system attribute. That is part one. That's the first doubt you will have for whether it's a functional requirement or not.
Okay.
Unfortunately, this is a requirement which is two ways. Okay, why? Because first of all, it's a little. I have done a little more analysis on this, but just to give you an idea as to how critical you have to be for any requirement. So the first problem here is the OTP has to reach the customer's mobile phone.
Yeah.
And if you say that it is only valid for 5 seconds, you have to ensure that the OTP reaches the customer's mobile in less than 5 seconds. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it?
Yes.
So that is the first set of implicit requirement in this. That is something which is related to reliability. How reliable is your system or your overall connection with the mobile company that all OTPs reach within 5 seconds so that this rule can be valid. Correct? If it reaches after 6 seconds, the customer will get angry saying that what the hell, right?
Yes.
So that is part one of the requirement. Part two is which is functional. And what is that part two is that once you enter the OTP, then the system will say whether the difference in time between when the OTP was sent and when the OTP was entered and submitted should not be more than 5 seconds. Right? That's the second
Yeah.
part of the requirement. So that part can be treated as functional, but the other part which is hidden here is that your system should tie up with a company with a reliable delivery mechanism so that your SMS is delivered in maybe 3 seconds. So the real point to understand here is that every requirement, that's what every sentence in the requirement has to be really looked at into real with a very analytical mindset. Otherwise a lot of things will be missed out. So even if you develop a system which can check 5 seconds, but is it practical? That's the next question which you should be asking the customer. That you are saying 5 seconds. This means that there is a requirement of getting that SMS to the customer's mobile in less than 5 seconds. Does it happen? Hello? Hello?
Abhishek?
Yeah, can you this one? Can you see the screen?
Yes.
So the point which I was trying to make is the most important part to understand is every sentence has to be looked at very critically to see whether there are certain hidden parts of it, and if that's a hidden part, and that's going to affect the overall functionality, you need to ask questions again, whether is it feasible or is it practical in any country to have the OTP validated within 5 seconds? Not possible, because there is always a network latency across the world. Okay.
But I've always said it's been 10 minutes, not 5 seconds.
No, correct. That the customer has to say, no. See, this is not you. You are on the other side.
Okay, in that case, OTP 5 seconds is not possible at all.
No, but you can't say this. You have to make the customer say, because you are not dictating the terms. You can raise questions and you can validate this, or you can give proof to the customer saying that it's not possible. But if customer says 5 seconds, so you have to logically cut it.
Okay.
Right? So that's the point is more important point is you need to kind of look at these hidden things which is implied from a statement. Once you know that, then you can argue, see, depending on your equation with the customer. Okay, because some time back I was talking to a couple of students who were telling me that what had happened in their project. They were working with, I think, Merrill Lynch or something. What had happened with them is now the customers don't talk to project managers, because they have been working with that customer for a couple of years now. So now every requirement comes to them first as business analysts, and then they give it to the project managers and everything. Even though in India, still business analysts report to project manager, most of the cases. But it's a customer which is most important part. So if they are comfortable with BS, the BS will take the requirement. But this is something which is, the point is, look at every requirement, every statement very, very critically. Next is search results should appear in less than 3 seconds. This should be easy one. What is it? Functional or
non-functional?
Huh?
Non-functional.
It's a performance related requirement. But what does it mean? So you can take it as a requirement. So now the second question which comes into picture is that search results should appear in less than 3 seconds. If you say that, hey, what difficult hai, yeah, whatever it is, customer will say, look at Google. Why can't you make a system like Google? You will not have an answer.
Yes.
Right? So then what will you do? You can't simply take every requirement as it is. So there are certain approaches which needs to be done, which needs to be taken. So there is something called proof of concept. You might not have to do it, but as a business analyst, you need to coordinate that. So there is some, let's say for example, something which is coming up, saying that you feel that it may not be feasible. Okay, what you will do internally is that quickly you will ask your tech team to do a POC, which is called proof of concept. So they will quickly write some piece of code to validate whether this is feasible or not. If it is not feasible, you need to now find out a different way to put this. Getting it?
Yes.
So this is the yeah, okay. I think we'll do this one first before we get. So next part, we have more or less covered this part, but just to reiterate, implicit requirements are primarily those requirements which are not stated. Okay, they have to be analyzed to be understood. Okay, and the only way to do this or to get to the implicit requirements is, one, you need to analyze every statement and look for hidden requirements. Number two, ask questions. If you start asking questions as to why somebody wants, you are not asking questions in terms of why this is a requirement. You are trying to understand, why do you need this? What is the reason behind it? So once somebody explains it to you, it will become clear as to if there is any hidden requirement. So the question is asked more to understand why something is needed in this manner. Why not in some other manner? Okay. So why is the most important question for every business analyst? Okay. So we'll stop at this. Okay. In the next class, which will happen tomorrow. Okay. I'll tell you the time, and we will then get into functional specs, writing functional specs. Okay. The first part of it, which you have done. And then based on the new information, I will show you how to write it. Based on that new information, there are certain things which are still missing in your FS, but it's quite good compared to the first time.